Okay, hi there and welcome to this knowledge tutorial. It's looking at question 5. You have two options here, hence why you have the I here and the II. So remember, don't do both, just choose one. But we're just going to have a choice of one today. And this is the question. The threats from abroad were the most significant threat that Elizabeth faced in the years 1571 to 1588. And it's saying, how far do you agree with this statement? You must use the following: Spanish Armada and the Ridolfi Plot 1571. Now, if you become really unstuck, you can't remember one of them, probably Ridolfi Plot, do not worry. Although it says you must use the following, you can think of another point instead of that, but the key thing is you must also use information of your own. So if you completely and utterly reject looking at the Ridolfi Plot, you look at something else, you must also add a third point of your own. So how could we go about doing this? Well, first thing we should do is, as soon as we see that, make a little table, yes and no. And the idea would be to say that, well, clearly the Spanish Armada is a threat from abroad, whereas the Ridolfi Plot was a plot at home. So that would go into the no aisle. And then here we've got two extras, the Babington Plot and the Throckmorton. We don't need to do both. You can mention both, but you really want to have some detail. So probably in the time limit, you would be wanting to see about just trying to get one of these done as best you can, or put them both together with another theme. The other thing, of course, you could have a look at would be to have a look at Mary, Queen of Scots, as another kind of, although it does, I suppose, in a way kind of border the two. She is from Scotland, so not from England, but for quite a lot of the time she was in England, and it was how people reacted to her. So a couple of things to note. You've got 24 minutes, 16 marks, a minute and a half a mark. So you have 24 minutes. I wouldn't suggest 24 minutes writing. Within that 24 minutes, you'd probably want a couple of minutes for planning, and that would leave you about 20 minutes to get this done. Notice, please, the target here. You only see this on the mark scheme. But AO2, that's your explanation, and AO1 is your knowledge. So an awful lot of marks are given to your explanation. Only some marks are given to your knowledge. So the weighting has to be on the explanation. Okay, so here we can have a look at the mark scheme. Level 1 to 4 marks. If we notice here, we can see that there's two elements of AO2. So make a simple generalized answer. You say, well, it could be argued that the Spanish Armada was, that foreign threats were a significant threat to Elizabeth. An example of this is Spanish Armada. You maybe add a tiny amount of detail. You'd look at other things as well, domestic threats. So you talk about, oh, she faced plots at home like Ridolfi, Babington, Throckmorton. You might add a little bit of detail for each one, not a lot. But then what you'd say is, overall, was it foreign or was it threats from home? And that would get you the top end of that. So, simple generalized, in effect, not even explanation, just kind of judgment on each one. Limited knowledge applied, and an overall conclusion. Was it threats from home? Was it threats from abroad? We have a look at here. Key big difference here is now we're into explanation. It shows limited analysis, which means that the key phrase there is implicit or unsustained. So here's where we talk about people writing things down, saying these things are really important, but not really justifying it fully. They might offer us some hint of why, but they're not really linking it effectively to this. Please note, you must try to keep it to the focus of the question. So keep the question in mind as you're writing for level 2. Really kind of drill that in there. What am I being asked to do? How am I going to therefore show that? There's a line of reasoning, but it's not sustained. So typically here you might find 2 paragraphs quite well, reasonably explained, but one of them, a third one might not be as well developed. If you notice, it says accurate and relevant information is included, some knowledge. So here again, you're applying evidence, but it's not very, very detailed or specific. It's just, it's adding to that wealth that you would have had in level 1, but you could have had a bit more specific detail to it to move it into level 3. And then in the conclusion, you give a judgment, you begin to justify it, but the reason you give isn't fully explained. It's not very secure. And notice you can't get more than 7 marks if you do not have a point of your own, or at least an element of your own beyond the stimulus material. So if you mention Babington or Throckmorton and you've got some information about it, well done. You can then look towards hitting the top end of the level. If you haven't, then you're stuck at getting no more than a 7. Level 3 is where you will see some analysis. So your explanations are directed to the question. Some passages, though, might lack a little some coherence or organization. So what it's saying there is one of your paragraphs might be weaker, and it's not. That is what a level 3 is. So accurate, relevant information, good knowledge, sound understanding, so that you really understand how things fit together with the details of the stories, and an overall judgment's given, some justification. So you're beginning to say, well, is it home? Is it abroad? Why is that the case? Why have you made that? And you're applying some criteria. Which threat was most dangerous for her? Which ones did you have to deal with the most? So again, notice a maximum of 11 marks if you do not go beyond. And then here, basically, if you are more consistent in the level 3, then you are going to be getting level 4. So again, accurate, relevant material is included, but notice it's precisely selected. So you're thinking of key features, and it's so that it can address the question. How is what you are applying, making sure that you absolutely mallet it in reference to the question. You're going to show wide-ranging knowledge of the topic, not just kind of, key features. You're going to have a wide-ranging understanding of the topic. The criteria for the required judgments are justified and they're applied. So, how are you going back to that question? Was it threats from home or abroad that was most significant? Why is that the case? How are you deciding upon that? And you can't get level 4 unless you've had a detail of your own. So here I've got an example paragraph. To some extent, it could be argued that foreign threats to Elizabeth were the most significant danger she faced. Evidence to support this can be seen by the Spanish Armada being launched to attack England in 1588. This was when Spanish King Philip II of Spain, intended to invade England by sending a vast fleet of ships to transport his army in Flanders across the English Channel in order to invade England. And I've said this can be seen to be important because it was the only clear time in which Elizabeth's reign was at risk of being lost to a foreign or domestic threat. So I've said, in other cases, all the plots that we will look at, they all get discovered relatively quickly because of Francis Walsingham's spy network. Whereas you'd argue the Armada was the one genuine time in which Elizabeth faced the real risk of losing the crown, and it was a real issue for her. Remember that in the Spanish Armada, it wasn't so much the English fleet that destroyed it, but it was in fact the weather. So here we've got the just get rid of that for a second. So here we've got a judgment and a point. I'm saying to some extent, so that's my judgment. And I've said that the foreign threats are my point. That's my stimulus material right there. Sorry, stimulus material is just here, but I'm using the anchor point of the idea of foreign threats. So evidence, I've got a fairly long sentence there. I could have added a bit more to it if I wanted to, but I've only got a small room, and I said, here's the evidence. I've got a couple of details in here, got the plan and the intent, and then at the bottom, I've got an explanation about how the evidence supports the statement. I've gone, in effect, I'm going back to that question at the top and thinking, right, how does this, what I've said, answer the question? So, taking it further, I've then got to think of a counter argument. I know I've said, however, it could be argued that the threats at home were more of a concern for Elizabeth. There were more of these between the years 1571 to 1588. So one example of these plots was the Ridolfi plot, in which an Italian banker in London helped to organise a plot to remove Elizabeth, replace with Mary Queen of Scots. The plot was discovered, and it led to the Duke of Norfolk being executed for his involvement. And this plot continues to be more important because it showed that Elizabeth could face disloyalty from other people in England, but also foreign involvement at home, which I'm going to say was more dangerous. So again, I've got a judgment and a point, I've got detail, and I've got my explanation. What I would then do is, I would say another example of this would be the Babington or the Throckmorton, and I could go through those details and again talk about why those were significant, how it showed links back to the question. If I wanted to, I could also talk about the role of Mary Queen of Scots and say it could be argued that were more of a concern. As a really good example is Mary Queen of Scots, because and say details about her coming to England, being in prison, being executed after her involvement in the Babington plot, and saying that Mary Queen of Scots was a more significant home threat because she was a stimulus for lots of these plots against Elizabeth. So that's how you could go about answering a 16 marker. And then to cap it all off, I'd have a conclusion. And my conclusion would simply be to say, overall, looking at all this, I think that the threats at home were a more significant danger to Elizabeth, simply because there were a lot more of them. Typically, it was focusing on the fact that she had a community within her country, the Catholic community, in which she couldn't guarantee their loyalty, whereas she knew Spain was against her pretty much all the time. Okay, so then I've applied the criteria. Hope this has been helpful. If there's any comments or queries, please feel free to comment, and thank you for listening.